Welcome to another Second Story Press event. We're so glad you could join us at OLA's Super Conference 2022. Today, I'm excited to be joined in conversation by Kate Graham, author of Govern Like a Girl and the forthcoming No Second Chances. My name is Jordan Ryder, and I am the associate editor at Second Story Press. The women of Second Story Press would like to recognize the ancestral lands on which we work and live. The building that houses our office at 20 Maud Street is situated in traditional territories, including those of the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Today, we've got 30 minutes, and there will be a question period at the end, so if anyone has any questions for Kate, please pop them in the chat. So welcome, Kate. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll give a brief introduction. Kate Graham researches, writes, speaks, and teaches about politics in Canada. She holds a PhD in political science and teaches in the political science departments at Western and Huron University College. Kate is also the creator and host of No Second Chances, a Canada 2020 podcast about the rise and fall of women in Canada's most senior political roles, a project which inspired her own political pursuits and 2 books. Kate lives with her partner, Jessie, and daughter, Flora, in London, Ontario. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Jordan. This is such a treat.
For me too. So thank you so much for chatting with me today. So let's hop right in. Kate, as mentioned in your introduction, you're the host of the No Second Chances podcast that inspired your 2 books, Govern Like a Girl and No Second Chances, about how there have currently only been 14 women first ministers in Canada, and not one of them has ever been reelected. In brief, could you please summarize what this No Second Chances for Women issue is for politics?
Sure, Jordan. Well, let me start by saying this project for me started as a political candidate. I was running for a party that had a female leader and heard a lot of things at the door about her, about, people feeling like, they just didn't like her face or they didn't like the sound of her voice. And for me, it started a research project into looking at why we don't see more women rise up to our top roles and why we don't see them serve for longer. So as you said, we've had more than 300 people serve in our most senior political role in Canada, being a first minister, so prime minister or premier, and only 14 have been women. And in a country where we re-elect incumbents all the time, we have never re-elected a female first minister to serve a second term. Women also tend to serve about 60% as long as men do. So I really wanted to better understand this phenomena. Why are these women not able to hold on to power to the same level that we see with men? And what are some of those barriers that they experience? So the project led me to an amazing opportunity to sit down with these women, talk about their lives in politics. And it's been a real treat to turn that into a podcast and now 2 books with Second Story Press.
So on that, why was it important for you to write a book about women in politics that was one for young readers, and one for women?
Sure. Well, the book for children actually started I was pregnant. I found out I was having a little girl. And we know that there is a generational effect when we don't see enough women in senior leadership roles. It sends it sends sort of an unconscious or a subconscious message that leadership and leaders have to look a certain way. And in Canada, that has traditionally been older, white, straight, affluent men. And so for people who don't see themselves reflected there, it sends a message that, maybe being prime minister or premier is not a place for you. So as early as about age 2 and 3, research shows that there is a gender gap in, boys and girls who aspire to senior political leadership roles. So the purpose of the kids' book is really to celebrate the women who've reached the top, but also to tell the stories about those women when they were girls and the kind of change that they were trying to make in the world around them, and to encourage, all kids, but in particular girls, to think about themselves as being leaders, not just in the future, but today. So it's really trying to speak to a particular audience that I think doesn't see enough representation in our top roles. And then the adult book sort of serves a different purpose, at least in my mind. These are amazing women. There's only been now 14 of them at the top. They have a huge amount of insight in what they've experienced about the bigger barriers that need to be addressed in our political culture and our institutions. And so I want that captured for history. I want people who are interested in politics, who are interested in making political change, to be able to read their stories in their own words and think long and hard about the kind of change we need to make if we want to see more women rise to the top. So that's sort of the purpose of the adult book.
Absolutely. What did you learn about writing about the same material for two different audiences? And perhaps more specifically, how did you focus the political content, which is quite nuanced? And as you're saying, for different audiences, you had very different intentions and focuses behind your writing. But how did you focus the political content for younger readers?
So I found writing the kids book very hard, like very, very difficult. I'm used to writing. I teach at university. I read and write papers at a certain level, and writing for and trying to imagine myself as a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old reading this content, and what would be interesting to me, what would be the questions I'd be asking. It's a very different mindset, as you know well. And so, yeah, I found that to be a really fun challenge, and one where I was especially grateful for the terrific editorial team at Second Story to help navigate through. But again, the kinds of things that, as a political scientist that I'm interested in, policy accomplishments and what were the election dynamics and so on, all of that, or a lot of that, is absent from the book. Instead, we really tried to focus on, when Kathleen Wynne was told that she had to wear a skirt to school because she was a girl and she knew it was unfair and she decided to stage a protest, like really focus on those stories that would feel more real and more relevant to a young reader. So it's a different kind of content and definitely a different portrayal of political leaders than what we usually see.
What I love about No Second Chances, the book for adults, is that you have so much of the interviews included in the text, and there's so much detail, and there are so many anecdotes that, like you're saying, aren't necessarily as relevant or interesting to a younger reader, but just fascinating to read and incredibly complex.
Yeah, this was really the beauty of the project, was the women were so honest about their experiences, and in politics generally, but certainly with political leaders, there's a sort of portrayal of confidence, and I've got this, and I have all the answers that we expect as Canadians, especially around election time, and the content that you'd want on the front page of the newspaper has to project a certain just a certain level of confidence. And these interviews did quite the opposite of that. It was really a peek into people's marriages and what was the impact on their kids and how are they feeling about themselves, their body image, their mental health, all of these things that, of course, any human being going through an experience like that would, it's a really complicated experience. And I really appreciated how honest and open the women were in the interviews. I think that's why the podcast has resonated with people. And I really hope that it has the same effect when the book comes out in May.
I learned so much reading the adult book after having read Govern Like a Girl a number of times through the editorial process. So it was quite a joy, and I got something different out of the kids' book than I did the adult, but they definitely complement each other.
Glad to hear that.
On a similar sort of situation, I was wondering, what sort of reactions are you getting from kids, teachers, librarians, and then women more generally from the two different books?
Well, I was actually just hearing from a little girl who's writing her speech on women in politics after having read the book, got it as a Christmas gift. So it's really neat to get to hear about the kinds of things that it's making kids, and particularly girls, think about. So the reaction has been really positive. I think many of the women featured in the book are not as well-known Canadian figures as they should be. Leaders like Nellie Cornier and Eva Ariak, absolutely tremendous, and also examples of Indigenous women who have changed our country, and not enough people know their names. So it's been really exciting to hear kids talk about which story or which leader really resonated with them. The other piece of feedback, and this is sort of a broader problem, and one we talk about directly in the book, as you know, but we don't see enough representation, even in the group of 13 that are covered in the book, and 14 now. There's 3 Indigenous women, but the rest are white, mostly straight, mostly able-bodied, not always, but from fairly privileged backgrounds relative to the Canadian population. So that is something that needs to change. And I hope that future versions of books like this and future pictures of the women who reach the top reflect a much greater diversity of women ethnically, in terms of ability level, in terms of socioeconomic status. We need to see a lot more diversity at the top. So that's one piece that we talk a lot about in the book, is that there's only been 14 women, but there are still even biases in what that group looks like. So we need to have more material that celebrates women of diversity that's shared with kids. But yeah, generally speaking, I think the response has been really positive, and that's definitely been the most fun part for me as a new author, is getting to see the eyes light up and the excitement in a kid who reads a story that she connects with for the first time. It's been really cool to see.
Especially when it is about politics and kids. It's not something
Mhm.
you would assume they would get all that excited about, but seeing kids, especially young girls, see themselves and what they could be and different paths they can take, and
Mm.
it's really rewarding. So I'm glad that that's been
Mhm.
the response to Govern Like a Girl, because it's definitely what we had hoped when, during the inception of the book. That was sort of the gold star goal that we all had.
Yeah, it's been really neat. And if I could just share one little
Mhm.
story on this topic. So, we've been really fortunate to do events hosted by public libraries in Canada, including featuring first ministers who were in the book. And there's been so many beautiful little moments as a part of those events. And one that sticks out for me is the event that we did in BC with Christy Clark. And there was a kid, and he came up to ask a question, and the question was about how he could be a leader. And she asked him what he cared about, and he said that he cares about the environment and climate change. And so she asked the class, and we could see them on screen, okay, who else in this class cares about environment and climate change? And of course, every hand goes up. And so she says to the kids, she says, okay, well, you are the leader of this group. As a class, let's talk about what are the things that you want to do towards, addressing climate change. They started talking about garbage and recycling, and Christy herself committed, I will go to the school board with you if you need to talk about getting support for your class to do this work. So, and to see that child's, face light up, the idea that he could lead this effort within his class. There was lots of excitement and buzz in the room on the screen. It was just really, really neat. And again, these discussions and these opportunities, it takes a reason to come together and talk about it. And if the book and the tour can be that moment and provide the chance for kids to be talking about the kind of change they want to see in the world, we have done our jobs. It was really, really neat to see.
You see that a lot in the book too, in the interviews, all these different sort of small steps that people don't necessarily realize they can take in their own life. And I think it was particularly in Kathleen Wynn's interview, there was, she hadn't seen herself in politics, or she hadn't expected to get into politics, but she started at a community grassroots level, and it built and built, and she realized the power that she had. Um, and so to see that, put that onto a kid, saying,
Mhm.
what do you care about, and how can you make that effect in your own life? It's just so powerful.
It
Um,
really is. Yeah.
yeah, it even just in the author events for the book tour. I mean, it's incredible how much power books have in that way.
Mhm.
So thank you for sharing that story. That's fantastic. Um, as you mentioned, you're running for office yourself. So I'm curious what lessons from the book that you maybe have taken with you into your own campaign and political career, but also if you've recognized a lot of the experiences or frustrations or the community support seen by the women first ministers in your own experiences.
Sure. Yeah. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is that,
Big question.
yeah, it's one thing, we can read about, here are the barriers experienced by women when entering politics. And there's a great literature on that, from it's harder to raise money, it's harder to secure a nomination, it can be harder to be taken seriously, the whole imposter syndrome. There's all of these different challenges. And it's a very different thing to then hear, a former prime minister of Canada or a premier talk about having personally experienced those things too. And so, yeah, for me, each time, I'm running in the election this June, and this will be my third campaign. I ran once before at the riding level, and I ran in the leadership race. And each time, I've experienced whether it's a sexist comment or even the feelings of imposter syndrome, the feeling of am I smart enough to do this? Am I old enough to do this? Am I pretty enough to do this? All of those things that we doubt about ourselves, and I think women in particular, knowing that the former Prime Minister of Canada also openly and regularly said that she was experiencing those things too. I have found that to be really powerful. So in the campaign, when there are comments or there are sexist remarks, whether it's online or sometimes even said to your face, it's been, for me, one of the kind of coping mechanisms to just get up and keep going is to know that this is unfortunately something that even women who have risen to the top experience all the time, but also that it will not change until it becomes normal to see people who are not older, white, straight, affluent men in politics and in our leadership roles. So yes, it's definitely been a helpful sort of tool for me as a candidate. And I've heard from many other, again, particularly women, but hopefully all candidates who put themselves forward and do face some of these things, to know that, even though it's not a great experience, at least we're in good company. It's something that unfortunately every single woman in politics that I have met so far has had to experience at some point.
Wow. There were striking similarities across the interviews, all in completely different circumstances and situations, but coming from the exact same places. So it's unfortunate, but it's one of the most powerful parts of the book I found, was not only the humanizing quality of the interviews, like you were saying earlier, where the women profiled were so candid about how they felt and how their political life affected them, how they were treated, how all of it sort of interplayed together into things like you're describing, imposter syndrome, but also just seeing how common and how similar their experiences were, unfortunately, because for a lot of reasons, they were women.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
It's hard. There's such big arguments to be made or discussions to be had. So trying to keep things somewhat clear. So yes. Okay. So like we keep referencing your podcast, and the first season was profiling all of the women at the time who had been first ministers in Canada. And the second season of the No Second Chances podcast just launched last week, and it's going on a virtual international tour. So I'm super curious about this and the decision making behind it. But what are you most looking forward to, I guess, about this new season?
Sure. Well, so season 2 of Canada 2020's No Second Chances podcast, which I'm really pleased to be hosting again, is a sort of virtual tour where we are visiting one country at each episode, visiting, meaning Zoom conversations, but visiting to get a sense about what is being tried and what's working towards getting more women into senior leadership roles in that country. And in terms of what I'm most excited about, I'm mostly done the interviews for the podcast now, and we're in the final stages of cutting it together and getting these episodes ready to go. But it has been amazing just how there is a shared ambition to see more women and a greater diversity of women in leadership roles. Every country is somewhere along this journey, appreciating that our politics do not reflect the people that they serve, and that is a global problem. But the kinds of things that are being tried and that work are very different depending on their context. So, in some places, it's been innovations within political parties that has driven the change. In other cases, it is legislation, things like quotas, like very sort of specific instruments to say, no, enough, we're going to change this. In other cases, it's been sort of a rising up from within civil society through changing the dynamics of campaign financing, like Emily's List in the US. So there's a lot of lessons. And I mean, I do feel we're just scratching the surface. It is a big world. And even trying to talk about a whole country's experience in a 20 to 30-minute episode is extremely difficult. But I do hope with each episode, there is a little taste of, just like Canada, this country is also working to increase the representation of women and the diversity of women at the top. And here are a few little nuggets or little gems that we can take away from their experience and think about as Canadians that maybe make sense in our context too. So yeah, it's been it's been really fun, a huge learning experience for me, and I hope Canadians are as excited to listen to this as we are to share it with them, because there's a lot to be learned.
Super interesting. Yeah, sort of as you're alluding to, it's really no secret that there are so many intelligent, successful, and effective women leaders all around the world. Um, so you sort of touched on this, but I'm curious what specifically made you want to expand these interviews internationally. You sort of answered that, so no worries. Sorry, I'm repeating
Yeah.
myself. A little bit more specifically, what do you hope Canadians can take away from this new season by comparing how our government, what our government really looks like compared to other countries, and what's been effective elsewhere, sort of bringing that into a Canadian context where possible?
So one thing I'm hoping people can take away is a lot of the changes start, and this sounds like an obvious thing, but I at least need to be reminded of this sometimes. All of these changes start with somebody or a group saying enough. We are done with seeing our politics not represent the people that they serve, and so here is some change that we are going to advocate for. Here is a piece of legislation we're going to start pushing. Or sometimes the speakers are people who said, "Okay, I am going to run," and then they ended up becoming the prime minister or president of their country, and we're in a position to make major change. So, uh, you know, sometimes we think about government as being this sort of big, complex thing that is far away from all of us, that can never change, and we must just accept things the way that we are. And I hope that one of the takeaways is to really change that thinking. Government is, and politics is, really all of us. It's just the sum of the things that we want and care about, and we have more power than we think that we do to change the places that we live, where we live, and to change the systems that we live within. And I do think people need to be reminded of that sometimes. So, if you are, I don't care what political party or what level of government you're interested in, all of them have a ways to go to make our politics more representative, more in tune with people. And those changes happen when people step up and are willing to put in the work and to try to, change the places and the systems that they're in. So I hope that that's a takeaway that people get from the podcast. It's certainly been a takeaway for me from the interviews. It's really inspiring to hear a former president of their country talk about what was that first moment that led them to take a step that then led to, major systems change, because we need more people who are willing to take that first step.
Absolutely. And okay, so going off of what you're saying here, we all know it's not a new argument. We need representation. We know we need representation, but how do we get there? And so I suppose making it more specific, what do you see that we're doing in Canada now that is working, and what are we still doing that isn't?
Sure. So I think there are a number of things that there's obviously lots of people and groups who are working towards seeing more women elected, seeing more people of color elected, more people who have experienced poverty and have other lived experiences get into politics. So everything from campaign schools to mentorship to there are groups who specifically fundraise and support candidates that bring an underrepresented view. So all of that is really good. I think we see some, but not enough action happening within political parties. So I do not want to get partisan here, but I am a part of a party that has set a quota that said we will not run with fewer than 50% female candidates and fewer than 50% candidates from traditionally underrepresented groups. And by making that commitment, we have made it so. We've got 80 candidates nominated so far, and we're well above both of those numbers. So we need to see more parties taking this seriously and putting forward slates of candidates that reflect the people that they hope to be given the privilege of serving. As a country, we could do things like implementing or legislating quotas. There's lots of things that we're seeing from these interviews and seeing from the examples of other countries that, legislating 50% women means that there are 50% women after the next election. It can be that simple, but that may or may not make sense in every part of our country. And so, parties, people involved in politics, people involved in recruiting, people who are encouraging women to run and, running campaign schools and things all play a part in helping to address this problem. The other thing that we know is a problem is we don't see enough women running. So when men and women run in even proportion, they win in even proportion. For it's kind of that beginning level, whether it's a city councillor or an MPA, MLA, MP. The problem is that we don't see women running in even proportion. So we need to address the barriers that prevent women from taking that first step. Sometimes it's about fundraising. Sometimes it's about confidence, that sort of imposter syndrome, that confidence gap. Sometimes it's about, disproportionate family responsibilities. So there are all of these things that produce gender inequity in our society that also produce gender inequity in the pool of people who are willing to step forward and run. So it's not so simple. I think it's just, we do need Ask Her campaigns and things like that, but we also need to think more broadly about gender inequality in our country and make sure that we are moving towards a more equal society, because that will produce, in my view, a more equal pool of candidates.
So we have a couple questions coming into the chat, which is great, very exciting. Thank you, everyone, for hopping in live.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one, when you were a girl, Kate, was there a woman in politics who inspired you?
Oh, yeah. Well, so I grew up in a house that was not very political. My first political experience, my parents were both teachers, was joining them on the picket lines during, again, not to get too partisan, but during the Mike Harris years in Ontario, and was really it sort of was impressed upon me that, when something is happening in the world around you that you don't support, you have a voice, and maybe even more than that, you have an obligation to speak up about it. So not so much a politician, but the organizers and within the labor movement, within educators in that particular example, who were willing to speak up. I found that to be really influential as a kid. And then a little later on, and what kind of led me onto the path that I've been on, is I had a summer job when I was in university working for 3 female city councillors in London. I knew nothing about city politics. I'd never even been to City Hall before. And what I saw there was a very different kind of politics. I'd imagine that politics was more, show up and vote every once in a while and maybe have the odd lawn sign. And City Hall was filled with people who, just like at that protest as a kid, were showing up and speaking about the things that they cared about. They were engaged. They were wanting to be a part of building their neighborhood or their street or their community. And so I would say those 3 city councillors, Joni Beckler, Susan Eagle, and Judy Bryant, were all major influences for me as well.
That's awesome. And we have another question. So who was your favorite person to interview for the book or podcast?
Oh, that's
That's a tough one.
I feel like mean to the other, because honestly, there's a gem or a big insight in each of these interviews. It's been just such a privilege to talk to them all. For this new season, one person who stands out is, and we haven't actually announced this yet, and the episode's not out yet, but I had the opportunity to interview the former president of Chile, Michelle Bachelet, who, for most people, that would be the top job of their career, but she now serves as in an international human rights role with the United Nations, and she's got an amazingly powerful personal story. And then when we see the kind of transformative things happening in Chile right now, it was just a real honor to get to speak with her. So she'd be probably she's definitely among my favorites. But again, everyone who's been generous enough to give their time to this project, I have taken away something from every single conversation.
So we're coming up to the end of our time. So I think I'll close out on this question. And it's a big question, so I apologize. You do, of course, talk about this a lot in the book, and it's more complicated than any one thing. But for people watching now, what do you want women to know about women's roles in politics? And perhaps even if they don't want to get into politics themselves, what can they do to support other women who are?
Mm-hmm. I would say my main piece of advice is, I think, and I know I said this already, but we have more power than we think that we do. So if you are watching this and there is something in the world around you that you are not happy with, that you want to see change, you have more ability to change that than you might expect. And so that can mean anything from sending a letter or launching a campaign or getting kind of mouthy about it on social media, all the way up to saying, enough already. I am going to join a party, volunteer with a party, run for office. There are all kinds of different ways to be able to shape and influence these systems in the world that we live within. And so I hope more Canadians take up that challenge. We give our power away by thinking that we don't have any. And so, being really clear with ourselves about what are the things that you care about, what is the change you want to see in the world, and then what are you prepared to do about it? I think that kind of empowerment in people being very actively engaged in changing our systems, changing our politics, changing our world. That's the kind of democracy that we need, not a sort of passive, show up and vote once every 4 years and complain in the in-between. No, democracy is supposed to be about giving people power over the things that they care about. So we need to take that power. We need to, use our voices, and when something's not going well, speak up about it and be willing to do the work to make the change that you want to see.
I love that. We have more power than we think we do. I think that's such a great point to sort of wrap this up on. Thank you, Kate, for such an interesting conversation. And to everyone listening in, thank you for tuning in, and thank you for those great questions. This was such a pleasure. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Govern Like a Girl from your local library or indie bookstore. And of course, No Second Chances will be available in May. I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon and stay safe.
Thanks so much, Jordan. Take care, everybody.